Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur. This is I want to make sure I get it right. It's been going around, but I was out of town, so. The Amplify Voices tag with the idea of Black Lives Matter. The original tag is from Jenny Johnston, and I was sort of tangentially tagged by Brian at Bookish in the comments to his video. And I'm going to start with a really quick metaphor. I have two plants that are the exact same species growing in my front yard. We have, like, along the front of the house, we have a brick, like, borderline for the flower bed that juts out like this on the edges of the house to kind of, like, create this artificial depth. And so we wanted to put, like, the same plant in each one to grow and kind of provide some symmetry. It does look quite nice. Now, we had tried a couple of different plants, and what we found was repeatedly one on one corner was fine, and the other one just, after a certain amount of time, it always would wilt. And finally we decided, okay, it has to do something with the amount of sunlight. Even though it's like the same face of the house, the same position on the ends, because of the way that our house is just slightly, angled off, one of those plants was getting more sunlight, which theoretically should be good, but this is Arizona, so it gets hot as Hades during the summer, like right now. And so the plant that was in that corner had to have more water just to be able to, like, stay alive. Not even blossom, just stay alive. And so that's become a thing now of, like, okay, water this one first, go water along, come back, water this one again, building a habit of making sure that plant gets enough water. Even though, again, same exact plant, because of their location, because of their environment, because of how much, like, sunlight one gets and the other doesn't, and really it's how much shade one gets out of the heat. That one needs more water for its leaves and stems to maintain turgor and stay alive. So that's my quick example analogy. Now, the point of this is to sort of amplify voices that are marginalized. Specifically in this one, a person of color's voice or any marginalized voice. So an essay, poem, novel, excerpt, or speech. Had a couple. So I thought at first, my wife and I are actually doing our yearly couple read. Sometimes we do more than one, depending on how busy we are. And that's Romance in Marseille by Claude McKay. It's been really good. I think actually when we finish it this week, she might be willing to do the wrap-up video with me. We'll see. Then the other one I really thought about was, we have this series. This is a really cool series. We don't have all of them because some of them are, like, out of print and $800 to find a copy. This is the David C. Driskell series of African American art. This is Archibald J. Motley Jr. And so each of these volumes focuses on an African American artist and just provides huge. It has just fantastic, text around their artwork. It gives the dates, who owns it, but it also provides, as you can see, just huge amounts of scholarship and annotation around what's going on. It acts almost as like a biography of the artist, but also a microcosm of culture. Motley became most famous for his work, and they're cloth-bound books. I mean, they're absolutely fantastic. Motley was most famous for his work painting aspects of African American nightlife in Southside Chicago. This is the one that's on the cover. You can see, here's Jack's Chicken Shack, no relation. This is Bronzeville at night. So just absolutely fantastic paintings. So I thought about talking about that. I thought about a couple, but I ended up going with this book, and I won't read the whole thing. I think that would violate copyright. But this is Going Back Home, an artist returns to the American South, to the South. And it's interesting. So it's a collaboration between two artists, Michelle Wood, two creators, Michelle Wood and, I'm going to butcher this in, Toyomi Igus, and they collaborate on this. So Michelle Wood is a painter and an artist and an illustrator. She had done some work with like a National Jazz Foundation. She had illustrated some children's books, done paintings, and and this sort of bleeds into question 3, which is why you chose it. Her experience kind of mirrors the experience, I think, of a lot of people, like my wife, where she grew up, Michelle Wood grew up in Indiana. It's not specified whether it's like Indianapolis or Fort Wayne or Gary. It might have been Fort Wayne. Actually, now that I think about it, in the book there might be like one like name drop of Fort Wayne. But my wife grew up in Chicago. So, you know, after the Great Migration, they did not experience, they're too young to experience Jim Crow. They're too young to have experienced all of those things. They didn't have a rural or farming upbringing, but they know that their ancestors did. And so for her, it's this aspect of trying to go in, and she creates paintings as she learns more and more about her specifically her grandparents and her grandmother, but what those changes were like in their lives, what their existence was like, and how she tries to internalize that and then create art. And then what happened was she did all the paintings, and Toyomi Igus, who is works with, I guess it's UCLA, and she's written some children's books, and she's like an editor and helps with UCLA Center for African American Studies. So she sat down and interviewed Michelle Wood, and that's how they came up with like the narrative within this book. So it's a really cool book. My daughters are big fans of it. I'm a big fan of it. I'm going to read a couple of pages. So, when I was a little girl, I heard many stories about my family, where they came from, what life was like before I was born. This is a picture of me sitting at my aunt's knee, listening to her tales as she did my hair. Of course, I didn't grow up in a house like this. I grew up in a big city in Indiana. But I tried to imagine what kind of house my ancestors lived in when they were enslaved on a plantation in the South. I thought it might look something like this. You can see the illustration. I was fascinated by my family's stories. I was the curious one who would listen to the grown-ups' tales. As I grew older, I tried to piece together my family's history from the scraps of memories they would share with me. When you look at my art, you will see that I often create quilt-like backgrounds. This is my way of showing how pieces of life can fit together. And so this is kind of a poignant one. When I got older, I had a strong desire to go back home to the South, even though she had never grown up there, but it was like where her ancestors had grown up, to actually see and feel the land where my ancestors lived. So I left Indiana, moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and started exploring the southern United States. I visited plantations and read a lot about the history of African Americans. I once saw a picture of a doll that a little slave girl named Emmeline made for her white master's daughter. I felt sad when I thought about the doll that Emmeline could not own, so I painted this picture. I dressed the doll in red, white, and blue to represent America. And behind her you can see an African American soldier who fought for his country. And so that soldier is, it's like in the margin. There's like great detail in these pictures in the margin over here. And so she kind of goes through like, you know, the experience after slavery as sharecroppers. And the hope that, you know, her ancestors would have had. Here they are picking cotton, and she even has like a detail of a hen picking cotton over here. And she talks about like in those days families depended a lot more on each other. Survival demanded that people work together in harmony, like the man and the woman in this picture. And then this looks like something you could almost have probably seen something like this. Music has always been an important part of African American culture. Slaves sang work songs to make their hard work easier and used field hollers, long drawn out notes, to express emotion and warn each other of danger. From these songs and religious spirituals came the blues. And then from there comes reams of popular music that we love. This is an interesting one. This is a picture of Michelle Wood's grandmother that she had painted, her grandmother Catherine, and this is really interesting. Do you see the snails on her dress? I copied the pattern from one of my favorite Nigerian outfits. My grandmother didn't really have a dress like this, but I liked it, so I gave the dress to her in this picture. And so she imagines, like almost this aspect of seeing a connection between she, herself, you know, her grandmother, and then generations and generations back to Nigeria, and what that might have been like. And there's some really cool ones too. Like this is the wedding dance of happiness. the importance of church within African American culture. And then this is the wagon to freedom, and so this is where the Great Migration begins, as they leave as sharecroppers and start going up to into the north. For her family, it was Indiana. For my wife's family, it was Chicago. This is a painting of Nat Love, who was an African American cowboy. And a lot of people may not know this, but they actually have like black rodeos or African American rodeos that are really cool, really fun. And so Nat Love is like sort of like the originator of that tradition, like an incredibly skilled roper. And I haven't ever researched. I don't know if those started because they were sort of, as in sports, the African American athletes weren't allowed to participate in Major League Baseball, or there was sort of like unwritten rules about you can have one black player on your team in the NBA for a period of time. And the Boston Celtics probably won a lot of titles because they broke that unspoken rule. But I don't know if that's where sort of the black roadies originated from, but really fascinating, just tangent. And so then this is a painting, this is kind of cool. This is a painting of her grandmother, and what she and Michelle Wood imagines her grandmother looking like as she went into a restaurant after the Civil Rights Act had been passed, and she was able to go in and sit down in a restaurant that was no longer allowed to have segregation. Remember, this is Indiana, this isn't even the American South now. This was occurring in other places. Phoenix had segregation. Cities all across the north did. But this is her grandmother going in like proudly to sit and eat at a restaurant, you know, right as that Civil Rights Act has been passed and enforced. And so Michelle Wood says, you know, she wants to go back home. So here it is. She wanted to paint a self-portrait of her in sort of now that she's moved to Atlanta and what that's like. Here it is. I laughed when I painted the square on my forehead. When I was little, I tried to take a picture of myself and I put the camera too close in front of my face. The flashbulb made a square-shaped burn on my forehead. The mark is gone now, but I remembered it in this picture. The house and fence represent the foundations of my past. The boards are my life's lessons. The crooked ones are the tragedies and hardships. I'm holding a hen, which is the link to my rural southern heritage. And the woman in the window, she's the person I have yet to become. After going back home, I know more about who I am, and I can picture the person I want to be. A seeker of knowledge, a creator of visions, and a keeper of my family's history. So that's Going Back Home by Michelle Wood. And then she was interviewed, and then that was interpreted, and the narrative was written by Toyomi Igus. So, highly recommended. Tar Baby by Faith Ringgold is another good one. This is a very famous one. I just prefer Going Back Home a little bit. My kids do too. So that's the, you can tag people. Anybody who finds that you have something you want to share with this, I really enjoyed it, so consider yourself tagged. And we just got back from vacation, so I've got a whole series of books I'm going to be putting up. Like I said, Romance in Marseille. I might get my wife to do this with me, but I've got some science fiction and some other stuff that I'll be doing maybe tonight, tomorrow, over the coming days. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe.